back, readers. Today we are on Chapter 2 of The Lemonade War. Our title for this chapter is called Break Up. And yesterday we kind of predicted why Evan and Jesse are angry at each other, or I guess it's more Evan is angry at Jesse. Jesse kind of doesn't maybe know what's going on. So I'm hoping in this chapter we get those questions answered, because in the first chapter they told us that Evan was upset, but they did not say why. And we made some predictions yesterday on that Google form, so let's see how those predictions work out, see if we have to make any adjustments to those predictions, or maybe we predicted correctly. Chapter 2, Break Up. Break up. Dissolution of a unit, an organization, or a group of organizations. The Justice Department sometimes forces the breakup of a large corporation into several smaller companies. So that was our definition here. Jesse didn't get it. She just didn't get it. What was Evan's problem? He'd been acting like a weirdo for 2 days now, and it was 2 days ago that the letter had arrived. But why had he been so upset about the letter? This is a puzzle, Jessie told herself, and I'm good at puzzles. But it was a puzzle about feelings, and Jessie knew that feelings were her weakest subject. Jessie sat in the cool darkness of the basement and thought back to Monday, the day the letter had come. Everything had been normal. She and Evan were putting together a lemonade stand in the driveway when the mailman walked up and handed Jessie a bundle of letters. Evan never bothered to look at the mail, but Jessie was always entering contests and expecting to win, so she flipped through the letters right away. Boring, 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 Jessie said as each letter flashed by. Hey, something from school, addressed to Mom. She held up the plain white envelope. What do you think it is? Dunno, said Evan. He was in the garage uncovering the small wooden table they usually used for a stand. But it was buried under 2 snow tubes, 2 boogie boards, and a garden hose. Jessie watched while Evan gave a mighty pull and lifted the table up over his head. Wow, he's gotten so strong, thought Jessie, remembering what Mom had said about Evan's growth spurt. Sometimes Jessie felt like Evan was growing twice as fast as she was. Growing up, growing away. It looks important, said Jessie. It looks like bad news, is what she thought in her head. Was there a problem, a complaint, a mix-up? All the nervousness she had been feeling about skipping to 4th grade suddenly burbled inside of her. The table's really dirty, said Evan. Do you think we can just cover it with a lot of cups and a pitcher and no one will notice? Jessie looked. The table was streaked with black. No. Evan groaned. I'll clean it, said Jessie. Evan had only agreed to have a lemonade stand because it was one of her favorite things to do. The least she could do for him was clean the gunk off the table. Maybe, she said, holding up the envelope again, they're postponing school. Maybe the first day isn't going to be next Tuesday. What do you think? That got Evan's attention. Let's ask Mom to open it, he said. Up in the humming of the cool office, Mrs. Tresky read the letter once through. Well, she said, this is a curveball. She looked right at Evan. You and Jessie are going to be in the same class this year. You'll both have Mrs. Overton. Jessie felt relief flooded over her body. The same class? If she could have wished for one thing in the whole world, it was that she would have wished, or this is what she would have wished for. She would be with Evan, and Evan would make everything easier. He would introduce her to all those 4th graders. He would show them all that she was okay, not some punny 2nd grader who didn't really belong. Wow. So we learned Jessie is a 2nd grader, which is typically maybe about 6 years old, 6 or 7 years old. Evan, who's a 4th grader, just like you, who is about your age. Jessie is hopping a grade and going to 4th grade. But Evan didn't look happy. He looked angry. Why? He said in almost a shouting voice. Mrs. Tresky scanned the letter. Well, the classes were small to start with, and now some of the 4th graders they thought they would be attending aren't because they're moving or switching to private schools. So they need to combine the 2 classes into a bigger class. That is so unfair, said Evan. I wanted Mrs. Scobie, and I don't want... He looked at Jessie. This is so unfair. Jessie was surprised. This was great news. Why didn't Evan see that? They always had fun together at home, and now they could have fun together at school, too. It'll be fun, she said to Evan. How would you be feeling right now if your sibling, or maybe if you can imagine how he might be feeling if his sibling, Evan, came to your grade at the start of the school year? What would you think about that? Or if you are a younger sibling, what would your older sibling think of you if you went to their grade? Okay. It will not be fun, said Evan. School isn't fun. And then he stomped downstairs and locked himself in the room for the rest of the afternoon. They never finished the lemonade stand, and here it was 2 days later, and Evan was still all locked up, even though he wasn't in his room. He wouldn't talk to her, he wouldn't play with her. So Jessie went up to her room and did what she always did when she was upset or angry or sad or confused. She started reading Charlotte's Web. She had read the book about 100 times. She was at the good part, the happy part. Wilbur had just been named some pig, and he was getting all kinds of attention from the Zuckermans and the whole town. But Jessie couldn't settle into that happy feeling, the one that usually came when Charlotte said, "I dare say my trick will work and Wilbur's life can be saved." Instead, she kept noticing an unhappy feeling, tap, tap, tapping on her shoulder. And it wasn't an unhappy feeling that came from knowing that Charlotte was not going to make it on page 171. It was Evan. She couldn't stop thinking about what he had said. Jessie could only remember one other time that Evan had said, "I hate you," to her. Grandma had been over and Evan needed help with his math homework. He had gotten that frustrated and he had that frustrated, screwed up mouth look that he had sometimes when he got with math or spelling or writing reports. Mom called it his "he's gonna blow" look, but Grandma couldn't help him because it was all Greek to her. So Jessie had shown him how to do each problem. Well, she just kind of jumped in and done the problems for him. That was helping, wasn't it? Grandma had called her a girl genius, but Evan had ripped his paper in half and run upstairs shouting, "I hate you," just before slamming the door. That was last year. Jessie rested the book on her stomach and stared at the ceiling. People were confusing. She'd rather do 100 math problems than try to feel out somebody else's mixed up feelings any day of the week. That's why she and Evan had gotten along so well. He'd just tell her straight out, "I'm mad at you because you ate that Rice Krispie treat last night." And she'd say, "Sorry, hey, I've got some Starburst in my room. You want them?" And that would be that. Evan was a straight shooter. Not like the girls at school, the ones who had started that club. She rolled over to her side to get away from those thoughts. Across the room against the opposite wall, she noticed the 3 pieces of foam that her mom had bought her for Labor Day project. Every year, the Rotary Club sponsored a competition for kids to see who could come up with the best display related to the holiday. This was the first year Jessie was old enough to participate, and she begged her mom to buy foam core and gel pens and fluorescent paper and special stickers for her display. She was determined to win that prize money, $100, but she hadn't been able to come up with a single idea that seemed good enough. So here it was, just 5 days before the competition, and the foam core was completely blank. Jessie reached for her book. She didn't want to think about the girls at school, and she didn't want to think about the competition. So she started reading again. Wilbur and Charlotte were at the fair, and Charlotte was beginning to show her age. Jessie read the words that Wilbur said to his best friend. "I'm awfully sorry to hear that you're feeling poorly, Charlotte. Perhaps if you spin a web and catch a couple of flies, you'll feel better." Well, the second part didn't apply at all, but Jessie imagined herself saying the first line. "I'm awfully sorry to hear that you're feeling very poorly, Evan." It sounded about right, and it would show that she cared, and Jessie knew that it was important when someone was feeling upset. She decided to go downstairs and give it a try. She would just do about anything to get back Evan the way he was before the letter. Jessie looked into the kitchen and the backyard. No Evan. She was halfway down the steps to the basement when she heard a noise coming from the garage. She opened up the door and felt the full heat of the day blown on her skin. It was like some giant had blown his hot, stinky breath all over her. In the garage, she found Evan and Scott Spencer. Weird, she thought. Evan doesn't even like Scott Spencer. They'd been on again, off again friends from kindergarten, but ever since Scott had purposely put Evan's bike helmet under the wheel of the Treskys minivan so that Mrs. Tresky would run it over when she backed out, the friendship had definitely been off. Jessie looked from Evan to Scott and back again. Now she had no idea what to say. I'm awfully sorry to hear that you're feeling poorly, Evan. Didn't seem to make up for much sense when Evan was obviously having fun with his friends. She tried to think of something else to say. All that she could come up with was, "What are you doing?" The boys bent over a piece of cardboard. Evan was writing letters with a skinny red felt-tipped pen. The purple cooler was in the middle of the garage, and the 2 plastic chairs were stacked on top of it. On the top of the chair was a brown paper bag. "Nothing," said Evan, not looking up. Jessie walked over to the boys and peered over Evan's shoulder. She said, "You spelled lemonade wrong. It's an O, not an I." But then she thought, "Oh good, a lemonade stand. My favorite thing to do." The boys didn't say anything. Jessie saw Evan's mouth tighten up. "You want me to make the lemonade?" she asked. "Already made," said Evan. "I could decorate the sign," she said. "I'm good at drawing butterflies and flowers and things." Scott snorted. "We don't want girl stuff like that on our sign. Do you want to use my lockbox to keep the money in? It's got a tray with separate compartments for all the different coins." "Nope," said Evan, still working on the sign. "Well," she said, looking around, "I can clean the table for you. The small wooden table is still covered in black streaks." We're not using it," said Evan. "But we always use the table for a stand," said Jessie. Evan pushed his face in her direction. "We don't want it." Jessie took a couple of steps back. Her insides felt runny, like fried eggs that weren't cooked enough. She knew she should just go back into the house, but for some reason her legs wouldn't move. She stood still, her bare feet rooted to the cool cement. Scott whispered something to Evan, and the 2 boys laughed, low and mean. Jessie swayed toward the door, but her feet stayed planted. She couldn't stand that Evan wanted to be with Scott, who was a real jerk, more than her. "Hey," she said, "I bet you need change. I've got a ton. You could have all my change, as long as you pay me back at the end of the day." "Don't need it," said Evan. "Yeah, you do," said Jessie. "You always need change, especially in the beginning. You'll lose sales if you can't make change." Evan capped the pen with a loud snap and stuck it in his pocket. "Scott's bankrolling us. His mom keeps a change jar, so we've got plenty." The boys stood up. Evan held the sign for Scott to read, turning his back on Jessie. "Awesome," said Scott. Jessie knew that the sign was not awesome. The letters were too small and thin to read from a distance. Evan should have used a fat marker instead of a skinny-tipped marker. Everybody knew that. There weren't any pretty decorations to attract customers. The word lemonade was spelled wrong. Why wouldn't Evan even take a little bit of her help? She wanted just to help. Scott turned to her. "Are you really going to be in 4th grade this year?" Jessie's back stiffened. "Yep," she said. "Wow, that's so freaky." "It's not," she said, sticking her chin out. It is too," said Scott. "I mean, you're a 2nd grader, and now you're going to be a 4th grader? That's not right." Jessie looked at Evan, but he was busy taping the sign to the cooler. "Lots of people skip grades," said Jessie. "It's not that big of a deal." "It's completely weird," said Scott. "I mean, you miss everything from a whole year, and you miss the whole unit on Antarctica, and that's the best, and the field trip to the aquarium, and the thing where we sent all the letters all over the country. Remember that, Evan? You got a letter from Alaska. That was cool." Evan nodded, but he didn't look up. "It's not that big of a deal," said Jessie again, her voice stretched tight like a rubber band. "It's like you miss a whole year of your life," Scott said. Jessie felt cold and hot at the same time. Part of her wanted to yell, "That doesn't make any sense!" But the other part of her felt so freakish, like Scott had just noticed she had 3 legs. Evan stood up and tossed her paper bag to Scott. Then he grabbed the plastic chairs with one hand. "Come on, let's go." He reached down to grab one handle of the cooler. Scott grabbed the other, and together they lifted it and began to walk out of the garage. "Hey, Evan," said Jessie, calling to their backs. "Can I come too?" "No," he said, without turning around. So that's not very nice at all. That makes me feel very sad for Jessie that she's being treated like this because nobody should be treated like that. Come on, please. I'll be a big help. I can do lots of things. You're too young, he said sharply. You're just a baby. The boys walked out. You're just a baby. Jessie couldn't believe Evan had said that. After all of the stuff they had done together, and he was only 14 months older than she was, hardly even a full year, and she was about to yell back something really harsh, really stinging and full of bite. Like, oh yeah, when she heard Scott say to Evan, man, I can't believe you have to be in the same class as your little sister. If that happened to me, I'd move to Antarctica. Yeah, tell me about it, said Evan, crossing the street. The words felt hot on Jessie's lips. She watched Evan walk away, getting smaller and smaller. He was deserting her. He wasn't going to stand by her at school. He wasn't going to smooth the way for her. He was going to look on the other side with all of them, looking down on her, telling everyone she was too young to be part of the crowd, and telling everyone she didn't belong. Fine for you, Evan Tresky, she said as she marched into the house, her fists balled up at her sides. I don't need you. I don't need you to have fun. I don't need you to run a lemonade stand, and I don't need you to make friends in 4th grade. Halfway up the stairs, she stopped and shouted, and I'm not a baby. And that will conclude Chapter 2 for today. Join me tomorrow for Chapter 3. We don't have a response for Read Aloud today, so I hope you enjoyed our story, and hopefully we can learn a little bit more about how their problem resolves. I hope Jessie and Evan, their problem does resolve. So let's find out some more tomorrow.